Hi, T.O.T. Carlson here, and when I first started collecting the 4K format, I was certainly wondering when we were going to start seeing the classic Christopher Reeve Superman movies come out. For years, only the first movie had been available in 4K, but now at long last, we've gotten a box set release, available in a standard package and also an Amazon.com exclusive Steelbook edition, which is what I purchased. So today we're looking at the Superman 5-film collection, 1978 to 1987. I'm going to unbox this release, share my opinions on the movies, the transfers, the features, and so forth, and let you know what's to be had here. Nice close-up of the package. You can see the individual steelbooks in there. There is foam between the steelbooks, so that's nice. I'm glad they took care to try to keep this protected. Got that crystallized Fortress of Solitude background there. I really do like that. Name of the package on top. The backing card that's on here on the bottom has all the legal information and so forth. On the back, we have a picture of all the contents that are inside this release. And I'm going to take off the backing card now. Okay, now under the backing card, you can see more of the copyright info on the bottom. The sides pretty much just look plain with that removed. The back has the title of the collection and that nice big S logo there. So now we're going to start unboxing the steelbooks. I'll go one by one and I'll talk about what's on each. There are 5 movies in here, technically 4 movies, one of which has 2 cuts. We get Superman the movie from 1978, Superman 2 from 1980, as well as the Richard Donner cut of the movie that came out in 2006, Superman 3 from 1982, Superman 4 The Quest for Peace from 1987, and then the last steelbook here is actually some collectibles. I'm going to open that one first before we start getting into the films. So there also is a digital code included with the release. But the cover of the collectible steelbook is Action Comics, which was Superman's first comic appearance. That looks very nice. Superman collectibles right there on the spine. Got the S logo on the back. So we pop this open, and like I just showed you, we have the digital code. But then what other goodies do we get in here? First of all, we get a piece of lenticular artwork of the 3 Kryptonian villains, Non, Ursa, and General Zod, when they were trapped in the Phantom Zone. That's pretty cool. We have a mini Superman 78 comic book. I haven't had a chance to go through and read this whole thing yet, but I assume this is basically an original comic story set in the same continuity as the Christopher Reeve films, so that's pretty cool, and I intend to go read this when I get some time. There's also a certificate of authenticity included. I bought a lot of steelbooks and things like that, but I don't think anyone's ever come with a certificate of authenticity. So apparently there will be 13,525 units, and mine is 3,229. Last thing we have in here is a booklet. On the back there you got Christopher Reeve and his Clark Kent alter ego. That picture is very nice. Like there you got first movie, more pictures, second movie, the Donner cut of the second movie, nice shot of Lois and Superman, Superman 3. If that artwork looks familiar, I used to have a replica of that poster hanging in the backdrop of my YouTube wall. Some more artwork there. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. And then the back cover's got another shot of Christopher Reeve as Superman. And then inside the steelbook, we got a nice spanning S logo there. I should also probably point out the set does not include the movie Superman Returns, which served as something of a pseudo-sequel to the first 2 movies. So just fair warning there. I'm sure that'll get a 4K release eventually, though. Now, why don't we get into the actual films themselves? The set starts out with Superman the movie, the first one of this 4-movie series. They went with the original movie poster arts or like variations on them for these steelbooks, and that looks very nice. You got the S logo and the light in the sky. Inside here on our side shot there, we've got, of course, Christopher Reeve as Superman. Each film includes a Blu-ray disc of the film, as well as, of course, the 4K disc of the film. The Blu-rays are blue, the 4Ks are red. And I do want to point out that the Blu-ray discs in this set are identical to the previously released ones, whereas the 4K discs are taken from new scans. So unfortunately, the Blu-rays are not sourced from the new masters that were used for the 4K discs. Really nothing underneath there. But Superman the movie, of course, starts the series with young Kal-El being sent to Earth by his father, Jor-El, when the planet Krypton is destroyed. He's adopted by Martha and Jonathan Kent, who raise him from a young boy into a good-mannered teen, but all this while he has mysterious powers and has no idea why he has them or how he can put them to use. He grows up and eventually learns the secret of his origin, and meanwhile, the villainous Lex Luthor sets a scheme into motion that'll involve detonating a nuclear warhead in the San Andreas Fault, causing much of California to sink into the sea, killing millions in the process. Meanwhile, of course, Clark tries to stay incognito as mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, where he gets a job at the Daily Planet newspaper alongside reporter Lois Lane, photographer Jimmy Olsen, and of course working for editor-in-chief Perry White. Superman the movie, as it's usually referred to, it's one of those great on-the-big-screen spectacles that reminds you why you fell in love with movies in the first place. Some aspects of this movie are certainly dated, but I won't deny, I absolutely love this film. Christopher Reeve was the greatest actor to ever portray Superman, and he captures both the do-gooder Clark Kent side in disguise, as well as Superman the hero perfectly well. And you get the perfect foil for him in the form of Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, who admittedly seems a little campy and silly by today's standards, but Gene Hackman just has the time of his life with this part. Great cast of actors in this movie, including Phyllis Thaxter as Martha Kent, his adoptive mother, Glenn Ford as Jonathan Kent, his adoptive father, probably best known for playing the bad guy in the original 3:10 to Yuma. And then you have Marlon Brando portraying Jor-El, Superman's biological father who sent him to Earth when Krypton was destroyed. Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, greatest one to ever portray that role. And her scenes interacting with Superman and Clark Kent in both forms are worth the price of admission alone. Even gets, Mark McClure playing Jimmy Olsen, the photographer. He's probably best known for playing one of Marty McFly's brothers in the Back to the Future movies. And the late great Ned Beatty as Otis, Lex Luthor's bumbling henchman. So many great performances here. The musical score by John Williams is one of the greatest of his career. From Jaws to Star Wars to Indiana Jones, there's nothing that guy couldn't score. The movie is directed by Richard Donner, who would go on to direct movies like The Goonies. He'd previously directed the original Omen film, and then he would direct the Lethal Weapon movies as well. Sadly, we just lost him not too long ago. The cinematographer on this was Jeffrey Unsworth, who had previously been the cinematographer on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and someone that George Lucas tried to get unsuccessfully to be the cinematographer on the original Star Wars. Sadly, he died before the movie came out, and unfortunately, they had to dedicate the movie to his memory as a result. And of course, the first film is just the beginning in this 4-film series. We then arrive at the second film in the series, Superman 2. And like I said, there are 2 cuts of this movie. There's the original theatrical version directed by Richard Lester. Lester was probably best known for directing the Beatles' first 2 movies, A Hard Day's Night and Help. And here's our spine text there. You flip this upside down on the other side and you got the art for the Richard Donner cut. They share a Steelbook. I really wish they'd gotten separate Steelbooks, but I'm just happy to have these movies in 4K. We open this up. On this side, we've got our theatrical cut of Superman 2, and on this side, we've got the Richard Donner cut. Underneath the theatrical cut disc, we have a photo of the 3 Kryptonian villains. I've heard them referred to as the Krypt Triplets, so I'll probably just use that name in this review for ease of reference. And on the other side, where the Donner cut Blu-ray is, we open this up and we get Margot Kidder's Lois Lane. Again, sadly, we lost her not too long ago. Great actress who showed up in so many movies over the years, but she'll always forever be known as Lois Lane. Superman 2 picks up where the previous film left off. This time around, 3 Kryptonian war criminals who were sentenced to the Phantom Zone by Superman's biological father, Jor-El, are freed following a nuclear blast, and they come to Earth with General Zod and his immediate subordinates, Ursa and Nan, taking over the planet. Meanwhile, Superman is struggling with what he wants most, and Lois Lane is pretty sure that Superman and Clark Kent are one and the same. So he faces the crisis of pursuing his romantic life or continuing to do what it takes to preserve truth, justice, and the American way. What will his decision be, and will he bring the Kryptonian criminals to justice? This is my personal favorite of the Superman movies. This time we're not weighed down by the origin story. We just get right into the good stuff. We get these three Krypt triplets who come to Earth and start waging war, and we get a genuine feeling of terror just throughout the movie. This time around, most of the cast and crew from the original movie return. The theatrical version, Gene Hackman had left the production while Richard Donner was shooting, and apparently didn't want anything to do with the movie after Richard Donner was fired, so a lot of scenes actually used body doubles, and then same deal with Marlon Brando as well. His footage, a lot of it was replaced with new footage of Superman's biological mother, Kara-El. The film also, of course, as General Zod, includes Terrence Stamp. He would go on to play the character Chancellor Valorum in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And we just get to see these characters explored a little deeper this time around. Seeing a superhero facing an identity crisis always makes for some interesting film, and this has some of the best action sequences in the series, not to mention some of the best dramatic content. Lester's version of the film tends to be a little more drawn out and has more in the way of slapstick comedy, whereas the Donner cut actually goes back, reintegrates some of the old footage of Marlon Brando, cuts out a lot of the filler, and actually runs about 10 minutes shorter, but it's a much better paced film that removes a lot of unnecessary tertiary material. Unfortunately, a lot of it had to be sourced from screen tests and inferior sources, but overall, I am happy that we did get to see Donner's vision in some shape or form on the screen. Which cut is better, I think, is entirely up to the viewer. I think both have their merits and both have their shortcomings as well. Moving on down the list, where the series starts to get a little different, we have Superman 3, which pairs Christopher Reeve with Richard Pryor, who at the time was one of the best-known comedians in the world. Inside this one, of course, we have Richard Pryor over there on the side. In Superman 3, computer programmer Gus Gorman ends up collaborating with some villains to try to take down the world's economy and make things better for their own means, regardless of who it hurts. Superman, Clark Kent rather, goes back to his hometown of Smallville for his class reunion, where he reconnects with Lana Lane, an old flame of sorts who's since had a child and is continually being pestered by a man who's a drunkard and thinks he's God's gift to women. Meanwhile, Gus and his newfound friends end up making havoc all around the world, and a mishap results in them turning Superman evil, so he has to find a way to purge the evil half of his body and deal with these criminals. They couldn't keep a good thing going forever. And at this point, the movie is much more comedic and the tone is just completely changed. Superman has been relegated to being a supporting character in his own movie. It's not quite a Superman movie because they make Richard Pryor the main emphasis, and it's not quite a Richard Pryor movie because they don't go for a raunchy R-rated tone to things. So it's just kind of a scattershot mess in the long run. It also makes the mistake of shafting Lois Lane. She only appears very briefly at the beginning and end of the film. It is interesting to see some of the scenes and how they unfold here. There is a firefighting sequence that's actually pretty exciting. And seeing Superman go back to his roots, to his hometown, and reconnect with Lana Lang, that's pretty interesting, actually. Some of those elements I actually quite like. But the villains are quite bumbling and uninteresting. I mean, even the villain played by Robert Vaughn, who Gus Gorman is tricked into serving, feels like a dime store version of Lex Luthor, but he simply lacks Gene Hackman's charisma and having fun with the role. This movie is a major step down from the previous two, although I do have to admit it does still have its moments, and I certainly wouldn't call it a bad film. That, of course, brings us to the final film in this collection, that being Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. At this point, the Salkinds, who were the producers of the original film, were out, and Menahem Golan and Jorn Globus of Cannon Films had purchased the rights. They're a low-budget exploitation film company from back then, probably best known for making the Death Wish sequels. Are they the ones you really want Superman to be in the hands of? Yeah, there's the art. I always like that, him smashing through the nuclear war. Very cool artwork there. There's our spine text. back cover. Inside here you have Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, who, of course, returned for this film. In Superman 4, Lex Luthor is sprung out of prison by his nephew, Lenny Luthor. He then returns to Metropolis and sets a scheme into motion to create a nuclear man who can do battle with Superman. Meanwhile, Superman is dealing with a crisis because he wants to rid the world of nuclear weapons. And if that's not bad enough, the Daily Planet has been bought out by sleazy investors who want to turn it into a tabloid mag. So, will Superman defeat Nuclear Man? Will Clark Kent save the Daily Planet? Well, this movie had a lot of interesting things going for it. It's good to see Superman brought back to the main character status after having to play second fiddle to Richard Pryor the last time around. Unfortunately, despite its potential, this movie is not good. With Canon Films at the helm, the movie had a much lower production budget, and this shows in the special effects scenes. They look much worse than movies in the series that came a decade before. Nuclear Man is just one of the most, hammy, campy villains, and you have to see this guy on screen to know what I mean. It's such a far cry from what had come before. Even the storyline involving Clark Kent at the Daily Planet never quite gets the emphasis it should. There's also sequences of him revisiting Smallville and seeing his old parents' farm and what's going to become of that, but that plot's pretty quickly abandoned as well. The fights are not the best. There are a few decent moments here, and of course Lex Luthor's nephew, portrayed by John Cryer, is probably the worst 80s stereotype character in the history of cinema. Ironically, he would actually go on to portray Lex Luthor in other DC productions. So this movie is probably one that's best left forgotten, although I do have to say, it still has a few decent moments here and there, and Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve are as good as they've ever been. So, how do these movies look in 4K? I'm happy to report that for the most part, this set does look pretty solid. They're not the kinds of things that'll ever be home theater demo material. The first movie in particular looks pretty good and has some nice, bold colors, but it's always had that sort of dreamlike haze to it, probably due to Jeffrey Unsworth's cinematography. And as such, it can only rise so high above its source material. Not a bad-looking film, but probably the weakest-looking one in the set. Superman 2 actually looks much better. The city fight scene against the Crypt triplets in particular shows off some really nice black levels. And again, you have a few effect shots, and those are always going to look a little worse, but the second film's a major step up. Ironically, the best picture quality in the set probably belongs to the latter two films, which of course are the lesser films, but those look very nice here. They've got some new scans, look absolutely gorgeous. The cheap special effects still look like cheap special effects, but I am happy to see that Warner Brothers did give these new scans. It's just a shame we couldn't get the new scans on the Blu-ray discs as well. Now, one thing I do need to point out in regards to additional features, this only includes the theatrical cut of the first movie. It does not include Blu-ray copies of the extended cut or the 3-hour producer's cut. Those are actually available on a separate Blu-ray disc, so if you want to watch those cuts, you're going to have to pick that up. I wish that included those, even if it was just on a Blu-ray in the set as well. But from what I can tell, most of the features from previous sets are included here. We get several making of featurettes, quite a few deleted scenes, and even the old Fleischer Studios Superman cartoons. Those are just in standard def, upscaled, and they don't look the best with some print damage. Those are products of their era. They're well animated, but there are a lot of very dated racial stereotypes. Consider these came out in the World War II era, so if you're offended by that sort of thing, you might want to steer clear of those. But for fans like me, they're certainly an interesting rewatch. All bonus features are on the Blu-ray discs, although commentary tracks are on the 4K discs themselves. There's also the Richard Donner intro to his cut of Superman 2 that appears on the 4K. So this is an absolutely beautiful packaged set. The movies are as entertaining as ever. Granted, the latter two were never going to be as good as the first two. Picture quality is very good overall. And I'm happy to say that overall, I don't have any really major complaints with this outside of omitting the other cuts of the first movie. Again, there's a lot of optical effects, and those scenes are always going to look softer and less good than the rest of the film, but they're as good as they're ever going to look here, and I think I'm okay with that as a fan. I do have to say, if you are a fan of the movies, this is well worth adding to your collection. If you're not a diehard Steelbook collector, you can always get the standard release, and that'll probably save you quite a few bucks in the long run. Of course, with that said, you might want to hold off until Black Friday as well, because I'm sure it'll be on sale when that rolls around. Are you a fan of the Superman movies? What's your personal favorites when it comes to the old Christopher Reeve era? You think Christopher Reeve was the best Superman ever? Comment down below and let me know what you think. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel for more content. I'm always posting new videos, and make sure you give this one a like if you found it helpful. I'm Taylor T. Carlson. I'll see you next time.